In 2016, voters in New Mexico overwhelmingly passed an amendment to the state constitution that allowed judges to detain accused, not convicted, accused people in jail before trial if the court deemed them a threat. It also reinforced the right to be free until conviction, a principle that has been enshrined in New Mexico's constitution since statehood. Now, in practice, the adjustment has elicited howls of protest from law enforcement as the court and prosecutors try to figure out a new system. In the New Bernalillo County District Attorney Raul Torres wants another constitutional amendment, reversing part of the one passed not even 3 years ago. We're starting there and also chatting about crime in Albuquerque. Here to help us, UNM Law School professor Serge Martinez. Tom Garrity is with us, owner of the Garrity Group PR and one of our line regulars. Rachel Sams is back. She's editor of Albuquerque Business First. And another regular, Sophie Martin. She's an attorney as well. Thank you all for being here. Sophie, what's your opinion on the proposed reversal, just in this broadest sense? What do you think the goal is here for the district attorney?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of goals. I mean, I do believe that the district attorney believes that this would be a fix for what he and his office perceive to be a problem that's making it more difficult for them to do their jobs. But there are competing interests here, and there are competing values here. Every time we see a high-profile crime, there is this kind of, light the torches and bring out the pitchforks kind of thing that happens, where everyone within the legal industry pretty much gets blamed. The courts and the judges get blamed. The DA gets blamed. I don't know if the public defender gets blamed. Maybe. And sometimes it even hits our legislature. But this original constitutional amendment was an attempt and intended to address a real problem in our state and our community. And it's a problem actually that courts and communities are struggling with across the country, which is that people who are never convicted of a crime in many cases may be incarcerated for extended periods of time prior to either having their day in court or learning that their charges against them have been dismissed. And spending that time incarcerated means that you're not working, you're not taking care of your children or your family, you're not paying your rent. There's often a significant loss of everything that we think of as being, part of our lives. And then it turns out that this person never gets convicted. There's a presumption in the U.S. and, as you mentioned before, in New Mexico of guilty. I said it backwards. Innocent until proven guilty, but we haven't in this country and in this state necessarily treated people that as if we really believed that. So I expect that there's going to continue to be growing pains, but it remains to be seen whether this particular proposal can make it with the electorate.
Serge, your thought on this? I know you watch this one closely too. What's your sense of it?
I mean, like Sophie was saying, we're responding in some ways to some high-profile.
Is this an overreaction? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I absolutely think so. I mean, I think it's easy to see when we have this perceived malfunction of someone who was released that we think should not have been, right? But again, remembering, whatever they've been accused of, they are presumed to be innocent, right? And all the allegations are presumed to be, untrue until proven, right? But when there's a malfunction in the other direction, it's invisible. When someone is held who should not be, right, then we don't see that. And it's easy to say, oh, the system is broken because of the things we can see. We really need to watch out for the things that we can't see that are evidence of the system being broken. And I've been really proud of the way New Mexico has been leading this latest wave of bail reform to address the inequities, the disproportionate impact on communities of color and low-income communities. 3 years out of the gate is way too soon to be saying this is broken, we need to fix it, and I think it goes in the wrong direction to try to push back against this presumption that people are innocent, but also our state and sort of general constitutional rights to be free when they're not being convicted.
It's worth noting, if I can add to that, it's worth noting that one of the impacts of the proposed constitutional amendment would be to flip that presumption of innocence on its head, at least during the pretrial period, where the presumption in not related necessarily to the person but to the crime in many cases would be that you were guilty.
Right, and put the burden back on the person, again, who's unlikely to have a lot of resources based on what we've seen out there. Certainly not the same resources as the government does. And people who are in jail have a harder time defending themselves, preparing their own cases.
That's a proven fact right there. Exactly right. Rachel, interestingly, the public, we're talking about some of the nuances of law, and that's all well and good. The public's looking for something here.
Yes,
and from the DA's office as well. And they've been very clear about that since the last DA had the seat as well. Is not Mr. Torres just saying, look, we need to take some drastic action here. I hear you. I was elected to make some changes here, or propose some changes. He can't make them on his own, but he's proposing something here the legislature is going to have to wrestle with. Has he just put something in motion here that we should all have a good conversation here? Maybe not such a bad thing at the end of the day.
I think Sophia and Serge have made some really good points. I thought that the point about everybody involved with law enforcement, the justice system, the legal system is taking heat because of the issues that we face with crime. And those issues are so serious. I think that what I would love to see is all of these players get together in a room and negotiate some solutions that would keep our streets safer and really respect and have a voice for the constitutional rights of defendants. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive.
Pick up on that, Tom, if you would. Those two things, are they mutually exclusive? Can you do both and keep the streets safe here?
I think the solution here is everybody sticking to their own lane.
Okay.
What you have is you have this weather system that's been created with APD and the increased crime, BCSO, and some debate around them not being able to, not using any type of cameras, lapel cameras or dashboard cams.
That's right.
And then you have the state police being brought in to help quell the Albuquerque situation for a 6-week period. So basically, what you have is you have this mounting tension that the DA, I think, he just played right into it.
Interesting.
Which is unfortunate because I'm a fan of Mr. Torres. I think he's really doing some good things. I think what happened here is he got caught up in the weather system of, oh my gosh, we've got to have some change, and he proposed something that makes Republicans smile and makes Democrats cringe. And so, I think what his solution is right now is really proof of performance. If he were just to say, you know what, it was just an idea, let me go back to focusing and getting the DA's office in order, focus on prosecutions, focus on really speeding up that whole trial process. Because for that's what I think Albuquerque residents want to see, and Bernalillo County residents want to see, is that you know what? He's doing what he was hired to do. He was doing what he ran on, which was to clean up, the district attorney from the previous DA, Brandenburg, and he has that charge. And now to go and talk about another constitutional amendment, he needs to go back and focus on the basics.
Interesting point there, Sophie. Without getting in the weeds of rebuttable presumption of detention, it's an interesting prospect here, and I understand what they're trying to do. Let me just kind of read you what they want to do here. A defendant could be detained for, quote, any one of the grounds of dangerousness, flight risk, or obstruction of the criminal process, end quote. And that's a departure from the current system, but only allows motions based on dangerousness. You see, he's trying to thread a little needle here. That's interesting to me here.
My assumption is that the set of priorities or conditions that are being proposed would allow the DA's office to cast a much wider net and make it much easier for them to make their case that somebody should be detained. One of the things, though, I think is important to note is Albuquerque is the tail that's wagging this dog. We're getting this push from Albuquerque. There's a discussion of crime in Albuquerque. There is crime in other parts of the state. DAs and public defenders and courts are dealing with these issues in other parts of the state. And when the constitutional amendment that we have now, when it was put together, it was the result of the courts calling together a wide range of constituencies to try and address a problem that has been here for quite a long time. I don't think that the change should be made without input from the rest of the state, other constituencies, et cetera. I think that has to be remembered.
Legislature is the appropriate place to handle this, in your view?
Well, it's really where it's gonna have to pass. It's gonna have to go through the legislature before the voters have a chance to take a crack at it.
Interesting. Rachel, let's talk about crime. And it's, we had an interesting high-profile article recently here in New Mexico about crime here in Albuquerque. You're well aware, of course, of the activities in Nob Hill and downtown and west downtown to get businesses protected better and all that kind of a thing. I'm wondering if this state police thing that Tom mentioned earlier, we had 2 shootings, fairly quickly off the bat. It's only going to be here for a limited amount of time. But we're learning that there really wasn't a whole lot of direction right off the top, in this idea that we're under a DOJ glare here. We don't need people shooting people, willy-nilly just to kind of get law under control. We've been through this. We've been down this road. How's this working out so far in your view with the state police thing? Is it a plus, a minus, or does it need more time?
So I think it seemed like when it was first announced that Albuquerque would get 50 state police officers, it was almost like you heard a sigh of relief, right? Oh, the city's getting some help.
Yep.
We've been understaffed on officers, struggling to fill those spots for so long.
Right.
And then almost immediately, you have 2 shootings by the state police. And I think people just sort of like shook their heads and were like, whoa, this really kind of throws us right back to where we were in the early days of dealing with the DOJ. And it shows us there is not going to be a quick fix for
That's
this.
a good point. Serge, your thought on that? The city, this is the number one issue for Albuquerque right now, for everybody. I don't care where you are in this city, this is the number one issue. Is this the solution, the state police folks?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea of having a surge of police officers I understand the appeal of it. I am concerned, right, because the response has been, well, the state police are under a different microscope than APD is, or whatever, which is, to my mind, the wrong way to look at it, right? It's to say, look, there's a reason that we're trying to do these things this way in Albuquerque, in APD. It's not a special thing that only applies to APD officers, that these are good ideas and good protocols. So having folks in our city that's, it's unique in the state of New Mexico to not have them go through that sort of training or that sort of mindset it's a mistake. And clearly, statistical anomalies happen, who can say, but it clearly doesn't look good and doesn't make me feel safer.
Tom, one of the incidents, a simple traffic stop. And one of the officers discharged his weapon at state police officers at somebody who was fleeing, caught the guy in the shoulder. But I'll remind you, the state police were also the ones that shot at that woman in the van with the kids. You remember that a couple of years ago? And that officer got fired. And I had a good friend make a good point, said it's very different in an urban setting for policing than it is for state police who are usually out in more rural settings. Does that make some logical sense to you that, you can't just flip a switch and be, the urban street cop guy if you're used to kind of cruising around on the highway all day?
Sure. State police has their own, set of rules of engagement. The APD has their own rules of engagement.
Right.
I think what happened, or what could have happened better, was the coordination of those two things. As far as an indoctrination for state police, say, okay, look, here's the rules that APD has to abide by.
Right.
Because now you have jurisdiction in APD's area, you have to abide by these rules.
Right.
And perhaps that coordination didn't take place. Now, to counter Serge, I think this is a great move. We have 50 officers. They have been making some really measurable impact with 257 people being arrested, several dozen felony arrests, 13 DWIs, recovered 24 stolen vehicles. So
it's no small thing.
No, it's not.
That means
It's not.
something.
And we don't know what APD has been doing during that period, which is probably a lot more in addition to that. But it's something that creates that sense of safety.
Right.
And I think that's what we're lacking in Albuquerque right now, is that just that sense that we're safe.
Interesting point there. We took a little extra time on that first topic because it's been so controversial. There's plenty more to come, though. After the break, I'll sit down with Spaceport America's Dan Hicks.